For months, we have reported on the top-down cultural communism being foisted upon the members of the National Trust. Surely it's no surprise that it has been revealed that the Trust has seen its membership plummet. Numbers have fallen 89,000 to 2.62 million in 2023-24, a rejection of the esoteric wokeness at the top of the organisation. Let me just remind you some of the examples. Earlier this year, they replaced the term ethnic minority with global majority to describe people who are not white. A volunteers' calendar excluded Christmas and Easter, but included festivals from other religions such as Diwali and Eid. Well, I'm joined now by the great Zewditu Gebreyohaneson, senior researcher at the Gartem Institute, which is incidentally owned by some of GB News' investors. Thank you very much for coming in. You've been campaigning about this for some time.
Yes.
And the National Trust is pretty much a law unto itself, isn't it? It banned people from coming to its AGM last year.
Yes, it did. And the funniest thing actually about that was I was one of the few hundred people who were turned away from attending the AGM, ostensibly because there weren't enough places. The National Trust management didn't mention that they deliberately chose small venues that wouldn't fit the amount of people who wanted to attend. But one of the strangest things on, reading the newly released annual report was that in there it said that under 300 National Trust members attended the AGM last year, when they had said that they had seating capacity for 590 people, which means that surely it was completely illegitimate to turn away hundreds of members before the AGM happened.
Well, it's pretty undemocratic for a membership-owned organisation to refuse its members' attendance, and a public company that had an AGM would be expected to book a hall big enough for all the shareholders to turn up if they wanted to.
And it did used to in the past. I mean, in the 1970s and 80s, it was booking very large venues like the Cardiff International Arena and places like that would fit thousands of members. At its peak, I think it was 2,500 members attending. So to only have 200 and something members attending only because people weren't, have been turned away is completely...
Does it effectively hold its members in contempt? It has all these woke views, which most of its members don't have. It offended its volunteers by making them wear rainbow lanyards. It's a bureaucracy that is unaccountable to anybody. Yes,
I think it does. It really does not respect its members in the way that it should. And the figures on falling membership figures really reflect that. And actually, it's higher than what you quoted earlier, because in last year's annual report, it was 2.72 million new members. This year, it's 2.62. So that's sort of, a reduction of 10,000. It's a reduction of 10,000, and overall member numbers, which back in 2020, it was 5.95 million. It was going down. It was 5.73 last year, but this year it's 5.38 million. That's quite a big drop.
But what about visitor numbers? It's still doing quite well in visitor numbers, is that right?
It's doing quite well in visitor numbers, but what the National Trust doesn't want people to know, so they've had a 5% increase in visitors over the last year, but that really is a convenient mask.
Well, that's pretty good.
It is good. I mean, it's good, but what they have failed to, acknowledge is that lots of people are leaving as members, but are still prepared to pay for, entry to these places, which are still wonderful, which do still have wonderful volunteers there. So it's not being against the institute.
But if people are still going,
yes,
does that mean that they don't care about all the woke stuff that the National Trust is doing?
No, because they're prepared to, because lots of people have been telling me, and we now see in the figures, lots of people have been saying, I want to show that, it's a vote with my feet sort of thing. It's quite sad because it does mean people have no say in, the elections and so on. But
you have no say in elections anyway, because they've got this ridiculous voting system where you're guided to vote for the people the National Trust recommends.
Exactly. That's perfectly true. Quick vote has completely skewed the election results, and the National Trust has been doing very many anti-democratic tactics, such as from this year, no paper booklets being sent out to members. When members try and, ask the National Trust, why haven't I received my booklet yet? The National Trust is choosing not to reply, but it's made everything digital, which, as Age UK points out, is very the elderly population.
When a lot of members of the National Trust, and indeed people who have the time to visit National Trust properties, tend to be elderly.
Yes, and they're the least likely to be support these new agendas.
But what is your solution for this? Because you've campaigned to get people elected to the board, and they haven't won.
Yes.
You've highlighted the complaints in the media, and the National Trust has carried on regardless.
Yes.
Can they just carry on doing what they like? And as long as visitor numbers are going up, it's going to be very hard to hold them to account.
Well, there are two things. I mean, I don't really hold very much hope of the National Trust management internally making the changes necessary to bring about good governance and, you know, accountability, which is really needed if we want such a huge charity to be run properly. But I would really expect the Charity Commission to step in and to realise that the National Trust is really pursuing a policy of managed decline, where it's allowing its properties to go into dereliction sometimes, while it promotes nature and climate change issues, basically at the expense of the built heritage, and is very deliberately shifting the agenda, focusing on getting funding for completely irrelevant projects.
But do you think a lot of people still love the National Trust and therefore they're willing to go along with this, and that they're not as exercised as you would like them to be?
Well, I think lots of members have tried to make their voice heard and are really shut down at every opportunity. You know, they try and the National Trust management shuts them down. The National Trust is looking to move completely away from having any physical AGMs, which is, I think, legitimate. And they're looking to move to just business-focused AGMs, where it's sort of just, this is what we're up to.
Thank you very much, Zewditu. Up next, it's